I think the American public needs to be made aware. This is a topic that's not getting nearly enough attention.
I don't think 99% of the American people have a clue or know anything about what's going on our tribal lands.
Lieutenant John Norris, Special Operations Marijuana Enforcement Team, California, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Morgan Hill, California.
The Mexican cartels, along with other worldwide transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, have become the biggest domestic public safety threat and some of the greatest destroyers of our natural resources, especially on tribal lands. Our first violent encounter with the cartels was during an Allied Agency cartel cannabis grow raid on pristine public land in the Silicon Valley foothills. When ambushed by cartel gunmen, my young warden partner was near fatally shot through both legs by an AK-47. This was the first time we had learned of the highly toxic EPA-banned poisons, neurotoxins like carbofuran, furadan, metaphos, being smuggled into the U.S. through our southern border. The massive amounts of water stealing and water pollution, the anti-personnel traps like Vietnam-era punji pits throughout many of these clandestine grow sites, and killing of numerous wildlife species. These public and tribal land grow sites can be as remote as 10 miles into pristine tribal backcountry or as close as a few hundred yards from a children's summer camp and Silicon Valley hillside homes. After 4 more officer-involved shootings, I was honored to co-develop and lead the Marijuana Enforcement Team, the MET. In 2013, a specialized game warden unit comprised of life-saving apprehension canines, a sniper observer unit, and skilled operators dedicated to this fight. MET's first 6 years of operations paint an ominous picture of public and tribal land, wildland illegal grow operations. Through 800 missions, we eradicated 3 million cannabis plants, most of them toxically tainted with EPA-banned chemicals, destroyed 29 tons of processed cannabis for sale, and made 973 felony arrests on growers, many classified as deportable felons with extensive criminal histories. On the environmental damage front, our team removed 450 tons of grow site waste, 455 miles of water diversion pipe, 756 gallons of illegal and toxic chemicals, and dismantled and restored waterways being diverted by 793 dams, accounting for millions of gallons of water being stolen from pristine public and tribal land tracts. With tribal nations throughout California outnumbered and understaffed, our MET was honored to team up with the Northern California's Hoopa Valley and Yurok tribal police to assist in their fight to stop cartel destruction of their waterway, wildlife, and wildland resources. Over the last 11 years, we have collaborated with these tribes on numerous cartel cannabis grow operations and witnessed the egregious impacts to their pristine tribal waterways, specifically the Trinity River. The Trinity is the lifeblood of both tribes and relied upon for drinking water, ceremonies, salmon, their main food source, and steelhead trout, a state and federally listed endangered species. It was a privilege to work alongside tribal police officers dedicated to stopping the destruction of their sacred waterway and wildlife resources while protecting their communities. During operations, we encountered hundreds of historical grow sites, found numerous EPA-banned toxic poisons, dismantled countless water diversions, removed hundreds of tons of grow site waste and pollutants, and restored hundreds of waterways with our tribal partners. While I've highlighted the destruction of our wildlife and waterway resources engendered by these criminal groups, we must remember that these cartels are polycriminals that engage in numerous other public safety crimes, even in the most remote regions of my home state now in Montana. The fentanyl black market has become a cartel cash cow, with their deadly product killing on average 200 Americans a day, 73,000 of our citizens each year, with a skewed percentage of those being on tribal lands. Given that a single fentanyl tablet can yield up to $90 on the black market on remote tribal lands, the cartels have moved in and taken over the fentanyl trade while engaging in human trafficking, theft, and other public safety crimes. These vulnerable communities are being targeted with crime and overdoses surging throughout tribal nations. Mexican cartels have targeted the Crow, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet tribes, leaving them strung out, addicted, and decimated. Tribal police officers are simply vastly outnumbered, making it nearly impossible to hinder any cartel operations within their districts. These examples illustrate the pervasiveness of cartel operations throughout America, especially in tribal lands. Our people and our wildlife and waterway resources are being destroyed, and stopping the cartels from poisoning our tribal communities must be a top priority.
Do you believe that the current administration has secured the border and that their approach is working?
No, our southern border is wide open and our northern border is wide open.
Absolutely not.
Well, and many Indian communities have been and will continue to be devastated by the overflowing of fentanyl that's crossing our border.
Can we come to an agreement with our panel here that the open border is increasing the amount of drug and criminal activity that we see on these reservations?
Absolutely.
100%.
Is it safe to say that the southern border is in the worst shape it's ever been under President Biden?
Absolutely. I've worked on the southern border. I know what the border looks like.
Would you agree, Mr. Norris?
Absolutely.
And what about you, Chief Roberge?
Yes.
You've had a lot of experience within our national forests and the use of toxic chemicals. How much more decimated does the landscape become on these tribal entities?
It's more severe simply because our tribal police officers are so limited. When we worked with, say, the Hoopa, as I gave examples, and also the Yurok tribes, we were going into historical grow sites that had been there 10 years. You know, when we would attack a grow site that we would find on other public land or, say, a private ranch, we have our entire Met team, we have the sheriff's office at our disposal, we have federal agents from DEA, from FBI. We can rally the troops. But our tribal partners with that division of not being able to get the local, federal, and state help they need to on their lands leave a lot of those sites untampered. They just can't get to them. So when we did collaborate, we were finding historical grows that went back, like I said, a decade. So instead of removing those poisons on the day of the raid, eradicating those toxically tainted plants that are stated for the black market, and poisoning any consumer for cannabis, let's say, now those poisons are out there for multiple years before they're cleaned up. Usually we will reclaim a grow site the day we raid it because of the lasting, egregious environmental effects on the waterways, on the wildlife, drinking water sources for our tribal partners in their communities. So I consider it far more severe damaging what these cartels are doing to our forests on tribal lands than in general what we can attack outside of those districts.
They're smuggling in known poisons into and onto these public lands and into tribal areas.
Some of the neurotoxins were literally in some of the Nazi chemical weapons they developed in World War II. Rodenticides, insecticides like carbofuran, metaphos, and yet EPA 20 or 30 years ago got their study data together to realize they were too toxic for us to use in America on our crops. And one 12-ounce canister of this crystalline substance, one of these poisons, is made to be diluted with 5,000 to 6,000 gallons of water, then put on crops to keep everything off of them. We can't use them in this country, but they are available in Tijuana. They are sold in other parts of the world, primarily third world countries, and they're very effective at keeping anything off of that cash crop.
I'm looking at the military experience. You have these SEAL teams, you have these Ranger teams that are hotshots. Could that be an option?
If they were infiltrated with one of their own, that's the only way we're going to take them down. We could put a cap on them. That's how we're going to do it. Infiltration.
He is correct. DEA has done that type of operations, and it's hit and miss. What you do need is more permanent boots on the ground.
I agree. We need more boots on the ground that are staying in place. We noticed that when we formed up the marijuana enforcement team. We had had so many officer-involved shootings, so many near-death experiences as officers. When we dedicated a unit of 12 special operators as game wardens, and we could stay dedicated to just that fight throughout the whole state of California, now we were making a much bigger dent. We were going home safe first and foremost, but we were documenting the damages. We need that type of presence, like my partners just said, embedded throughout Montana and really any other state having this problem. We know it's border to border, left, right, east, west, north, south. But with that, I think we need the counseling, the education, educating our children on the fentanyl crisis, what to detect, human trafficking, target indicators, because these polycriminals are dealing in so many crimes that threaten every American from one threat or another, whether it's fentanyl, whether it's tainted cannabis, human trafficking on tribal lands and beyond. It's the number one national priority I think we need to deal with administratively from all levels, but especially keeping enough enforcement embedded in all of our states to have a real presence and have an actual deterrence on these cartels and the evil they present.
I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these in writing. The subcommittee stands adjourned.